Silence. In politics, silence can be louder than words. And sometimes it's the most dangerous weapon a leader can wield. When Donald Trump took the stage at the United Nations, the world braced itself. His speech was fiery, filled with the trademark rhetoric that shakes allies and emboldens critics. The room was tense, the cameras caught every smirk, every clap, every side eye. But when it was over and journalists rushed for Canadian reaction, Prime Minister Mark Carney said nothing. No comment. No soundbite. Just silence. To many, this might have looked like hesitation. But in reality, it was something far more powerful: strategic restraint. Why would a leader hold back, especially in the global spotlight of the UN? The answer lies in the fine line between diplomacy and disaster. At the United Nations, every word is magnified. Every phrase can ripple across continents, strain alliances, or ignite headlines that last for weeks. Carney understood this. A quick reaction, a jab at Trump's words, or even a subtle critique could have triggered a spiral of escalation, one that Canada simply doesn't need. Instead, Carney played the long game. He chose patience over provocation. And in politics, patience is not weakness. It's discipline. Consider the domestic angle. At home in Canada, the country is divided in how it sees Trump. Some Canadians resent his policies, others quietly admire his boldness. A sharp rebuke from Carney would risk alienating voters, feeding polarization, and opening the door for opponents to claim he was acting more like an activist than a statesman. Silence, on the other hand, avoided that trap. It was a move that kept the political playing field steady, while keeping Canadians guessing about his next step. Internationally, the optics are even clearer. Leaders who rush into the media spotlight with hot takes often end up boxed in. Their words get twisted, headlines exaggerate, rivals pounce. By refusing to play that game, Carney projected calm, steadiness, and self-control. He didn't look rattled. He didn't look provoked. He looked deliberate. And in diplomacy, deliberate is always stronger than reactive. This is the art of risk mitigation. When you speak, you commit. When you stay quiet, you preserve flexibility. Carney's silence left the door wide open. He could respond later, after consulting advisors, after reading the room, after watching how Trump's words played across the globe. Or he could never respond at all, letting the controversy burn itself out without Canada being dragged into the flames. That is not avoidance. That is calculation. And Tom Mulcair saw it. The former NDP leader, never shy about critiquing those in power, called Carney's silence very wise. Think about that. Mulcair wasn't just commenting on what Carney didn't say. He was sending a message about what politics in moments like these should look like: careful, thoughtful, measured. Not the knee-jerk reactions that dominate headlines, but the kind of quiet chess moves that leaders make when they're thinking 3 steps ahead. Now step back for a moment and imagine the scene. Trump thunders at the UN, the American delegation beams with pride, critics groan, journalists flood social media with outrage and applause. And there's Carney, Canada's Prime Minister, sitting there stone-faced. No clap, no visible smirk, no outburst. Just stillness. That stillness itself became an image, a statement, without him ever saying a single word. It's almost paradoxical: silence that speaks. Silence that deflects controversy but commands respect. Silence that denies opponents the oxygen they crave. For Carney, this isn't about weakness or fear. It's about leverage. By staying quiet, he holds the power to define Canada's stance on his own terms, at his own timing. When the storm of Trump's speech blows over, Carney can step forward with a message that reflects Canada's values, without it being drowned out in the chaos of the moment. And this is where the strategy gets even sharper. In politics, the first voice is rarely remembered. The lasting voice is the one that enters after the dust settles, when emotions cool, when people are ready to listen. By holding back, Carney positions himself to be that lasting voice. That's not passivity, it's timing. But let's be clear, there are risks in silence too. Opponents at home will say Carney ducked the issue, that he was too afraid to confront Trump directly. They'll argue Canada looked weak, that leadership requires speaking truth to power. Yet, what those critics miss is the difference between symbolic bravado and effective diplomacy. A fiery quote might win headlines, but it can also close doors, poison negotiations, and limit options. Carney avoided that dead end. This is how serious leaders operate. They know that every word at the UN, every reaction on the world stage, is more than performance, it's currency. You can spend it recklessly for applause, or you can save it for when it truly counts. Carney chose to save it. And in that choice lies the lesson: silence is not emptiness. Silence is space. Space to think, space to maneuver, space to protect your country's interests in a world where one wrong word can spark a diplomatic firestorm. The brilliance of this moment is that it also exposes the difference between politics at home and politics abroad. Domestically, silence avoids deepening the divide between Canadians on Trump. Internationally, silence projects maturity and composure. And for Carney, threading that needle is exactly what leadership demands. Mulcair's remark, "very wise," isn't just a compliment. It's a signal. It's a reminder that in times of global turbulence, Canada benefits when its leaders resist the temptation to react impulsively. Instead, they must act strategically, not for the news cycle, but for the long-term positioning of the nation. That's what Carney did. He preserved flexibility, protected Canada's image, and refused to let Trump's theatrics dictate Canada's role on the world stage. But this moment at the UN wasn't just about what Carney chose not to say, it was about what kind of leader he's proving himself to be. In politics, silence is rarely accidental. It's either weakness or strategy. And Carney's silence was pure strategy. By refraining from commentary, he showed that leadership isn't about chasing every headline. It's about controlling the tempo, picking your ground, and deciding when words will actually matter. Think of it this way: Trump thrives on reactions. His speeches are designed to provoke, to spark anger, applause, and outrage. Every critic who rushes to respond only adds oxygen to the fire. Carney didn't give him that. He left Trump's words hanging in the air, without Canada feeding the storm. That restraint was not passivity, it was control. And in that control lies power. Carney preserved flexibility. He can choose to address Trump later, on Canada's own terms, after consulting with allies, after gauging public reaction, when his words will carry weight rather than get lost in the noise. Or he can choose to never respond, letting Trump's speech fade while Canada stands above the fray. Either way, Carney, not Trump, keeps the initiative. Domestically, this matters too. Canadians are divided on Trump. Some despise his politics, others quietly admire his defiance. If Carney had lashed out, he risked deepening polarization, feeding critics, and looking like he was playing politics instead of leading. Silence avoided that trap. It kept him statesmanlike, refusing to get dragged down into partisan mudslinging. Internationally, the optics are even stronger. At the UN, every word is magnified. A single phrase can spark tension with allies or headlines that overshadow Canada's priorities. By holding back, Carney projected maturity, calm, and seriousness. He looked less like a player in Trump's show, and more like a leader writing his own script. And then comes the chessboard analogy. Politics, especially at the UN, is a game of strategy, not emotion. Trump moved aggressively. Carney didn't counter immediately, he waited. In chess, the smartest players don't rush into flashy moves. They build position, anticipate, and strike when it counts. Carney's silence was exactly that, positioning. Not weakness. Not fear. Strategy. Of course, critics will still argue. They'll say silence is avoidance, that Canada looked timid. But what those critics miss is that restraint often speaks louder than any soundbite. Silence denies Trump the reaction he craves. Silence keeps allies guessing, enemies off balance, and journalists chasing a story that Carney, not his opponents, controls. Tom Mulcair understood this. That's why he called it very wise. Because in politics, wisdom isn't just knowing what to say. It's knowing when to say nothing at all. This is the deeper lesson: silence can be substance. Restraint can be strength. And in a world of noisy politics, sometimes the leader who says least is the one who commands the most respect. Carney's silence at the UN wasn't empty. It was full of calculation, full of control, full of strategy. And in that silence, Canada may have just redefined how its voice will be heard on the world stage. And that silence may echo louder than any speech.